The opening to be read items will include tonight such topics as history, public buildings, originality, closed systems, and simple men like simple answers. In fact, so do the complex also. Except when they hear them, they all say, no, that's far too simple. Well, hey, man, said local conditions, what do you think life is? A game? Though you're cautioned otherwise, it's not possible to cheat on tests administered in a closed system. No. And now a brief intellectual, if not psychological, history of Western man. Jehovah shot Zeus. Voltaire shot Jehovah. Freud shot Voltaire. Now tell us, who shot you? No. What? You mean to say that you're still standing? Shame, shame. And now for a travel tip. The reason it's so cold on the bus is because someone left the windows open. But hey, just a minute ago you were saying almost the opposite about test and closed systems. You see, folks, there's an example of just what I'm talking about. People who ride these inner-city conveyances for too long tend to become rigid, frigid, deaf, and one-eyed. Perhaps I should have included complicated. No. Facts you can count on. A real man doesn't let his stomach push him around any more than do the residents of the condo's penthouse take any guff from the super in the basement. Yes, facts you can count on, if you can't count much past two. In his office, this one chap had but two ironclad rules. Don't store lint near the copy machine, and never let anyone with fresh ideas near my brother Fred. And the viewer writes, earlier this afternoon I think I had a small stroke, but it's hard to tell. Additional communications, definitions, and explanations and stuff. Top 40 radio, the mind. Its audience, the same. A father once told his son, trying to become more conscious is like trying to build a bottle in a ship, and the nipper immediately joined in. I get it, because no matter what you do, there you are. And the old man thought, geez, I never thought about it like that. And the kid said, well, neither had I till you mentioned it. And to tell you the truth, from now on out, the conversation became really too muddled and confusing to be of any rational interest. And a local DJ said, what do you mean became? In closed systems, all broadcasters eventually become receivers of their own transmissions. And a hometown program director said, you know what? That there alone damn near answers all the perplexing questions regarding man's mental processes, in case that was your or my interest. One guy thought, it doesn't matter much what you know if you can put words together in a certain way. A wandering mystic, invited by the king to visit court, said to the ruler, tell me in detail about your life thus far, and I will reveal to you your true level of consciousness. And the king smiled his pleasure at the offer and began his reply. Well, that's enough. You've told me all I need to know. After pondering the matter for a moment, one civilian made the observation, The trouble with originality is that, well, it's stuff you've never heard before and you can't easily sing along with. Then there was this man who threw away all of his notepads, saying that they caused him to want to make notes. Pop quiz. First guy asks, why did men start building libraries? And second guy replies, you mean besides to show off? Yeah, besides that. Oh, well, you mean besides to publicly confess to their faulty memory? Yeah, besides that too. Oh, I've got it. So that they could take pilfered materials, the books, and house them in what appears to be honest, original structures. That is, each individual library building. Now a quiz for use. Is this really about printed materials and their storage, or about the mind of man and what it believes about what it finds in it? In itself. Two other guys were talking, and the first one said, we're all related. We all had the same mother and father. And the second guy replied, no, we didn't. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. Yes, we did. Oh, you mean intellectually? Yes, we did. And now another kind of mortal history, this time of one man standing in for all of humanity. Once he got past telling God to kiss his ass, he moved on to telling the king to do so, then on to telling all circumstances, and now looks forward to the day when he has no one left to tell to kiss his ass. Not only is internal cannibalism and incest proper to a mystic, but self-insemination as well. And a local sperm donor says, what do you mean, proper? Then in his own defense, and rightfully so, one cityite said, hey, give me a break. If I had any originality or talent, I wouldn't have to be a disc jockey or a news anchor or a fucking priest. Give me a break, how about it? From the Warrior's Dictionary, honor. Amongst the ordinary, aggression in its best clothes. Gazing out his upper floor office window, he unexpectedly turned momentarily reflective and thought, when your happiness depends on your city successes, every day is an off-year election. And now for some street-level psychosexual news. The truly urbane and sophisticated are those whose life does not have to tell, you get on bottom. One day, a young lad asked his father, what do you think life says to the more conscious? And the elder replied, you don't really want to know. And the boy insisted, yes, I do, I really do. To which his father responded, no, because if you did, you'd become so. And the nipper had to concede, touchy, you old fox, touche and away. There was once a people who called the mystical way the religion that few can believe. Then later changed their label to the philosophy that few can understand. And finally named it the life that few know exists. Then exploded and became there once was a people. And now for some psycho grazing news. The simpler be the sheep and cows, the more they depend on the herd. Even if you're smart, you're dumb when you let your attention lapse. A kid asked his father, why do those who've chosen to entertain complain most about their profession? And the elder merely raised his eyebrows and shrugged. Then the kid inquired, even though sometimes it's said that some viewer has written in saying that they fail to see how certain items that are read together are related to one another, I've also got to tell you that sometimes when we are personally on the same page with some other item, even I fail to grasp the connection. And the old man just shrugged again. And now this special feature, how assumed comprehension can unprofitably grow on you. One man changed his name to something that even he couldn't pronounce. One aspect of the mystical life seldom mentioned. If someone could be conscious enough to suck the spurious breath out of man's routine existence, and for some inexplicable reason attempted to do so, life would draw such a person softly to her breast as with a combat boot and a roach. Then there was this man who thought, things like that really gives me the depressions. And his neighbor said, that's because you're only a fake mystic. And the man then thought, now I've really got the blues. Announcement. Anyone who doesn't clearly understand that life can and does smartly look after itself has yet to mentally be alive sufficient even for a house painter to know where houses come from, much less whole subdivisions. And to underline my point, just then several drywallers said, what the hell is a house painter? Oh, here we're going to try one of these again. Couldn't resist because they never seemed to. The sign on the entry route to the city's intellectual freeway read, give criticism, take criticism. Then there was one chap who believed that his thoughts had backed up on him, but his proctologist straightened him out about that pretty quick, all right. A certain friction toy one day thought, if I ever quit thinking that everyone else is extremely stupid, how would I run? And now some medical news of a less, shall we say, specialized nature. Still being here is proof that either you're not dead or that you haven't given up, which to a mystic is one and the same. When he was little, one man had a toy train with many different cars that he would hook up together in various combinations. And now that he's bigger and on the track of greater games, he does the same thing with ideas. There was once a mystical school that kept itself from being overrun by telling all interested parties and potential applicants to think about it. Everyone has a twin, including the routine history of man. And a viewer writes, after thinking about an earlier item you read in which a young lad included therein noted that at times even he wasn't sure why stories about him were on the same page with certain other items, I have come up with one possibility, to wit, it's done to save paper. I hope this idea may be of some use to someone, especially if they happen to have the ability to take it non-literally and can reflect it onto the matter of their own mental energy conservation, yours potentially, etc. Teacher opened class with this story. Once upon a time in the land of fairy tales, a reporter asked a reputed mystic for an interview, and the non-standard one replied, I don't sleep with strangers or dance with those with no passion. Now tell me, boys and girls, do you think we could learn something from this regarding our own conversational habits? A man once saw a book with the title, How the World's Great Religions Began, and thought, well, goddamn, everybody already knows that. A girl once asked her mother, do you think that there is some specific reason for this to be in the form of a girl once asked her mother rather than the more common a boy asked his father? And upon receiving only a non-committal shrug from her elder, proceeded on with her real question. Do you figure that the more conscious ever have to read to the very end of a murder mystery to know what's going on and who did it? And her mother replied, the way I figure, such people don't have to do anything to know what's going on, much less who did it. And after swishing this around her mouth for a moment, the nipperette thought, geez, I'm glad I don't have to wear a jock. Once those pursuing the mystical experience get a good taste of what it is, they no longer think of it as strange or spooky, but rather as their inalienable right and personal destiny, if they could but exercise it more often. To the more conscious, all of history is now outdated. It is nothing more than a history of history, a reporting of his less than human days, a reporting of man's less than human days. Rewrite, while the ordinary chase whatever is fashionable, mystics continue after the same old thing. The geography of the thing. You either keep fighting brush fires where you are or move to another state. If you recall, and I'm talking about history from last time, and I mentioned that there is a standard history and a metaphysical history. And by going into a second night of it and For all I know, even though they didn't put it up there, some of this could be allegorical, so you know what happens after that. When I say standard metaphysical history, even by history, I do not limit it to written history. By no means. Certainly not just academic history, but even the written history, even history in the ordinary sense of the word. Because those minimally civilized, with no particular knowledge of history, they still have a sense of what I'm now calling standard history, just ordinary history. They do. And there could be someone who would be hard-pressed to show any recognition on their face if you even said the Holy Roman Empire, or anything, Grecian civilization, the pharaohs, the Middle Ages. They might not show any particular recognition. But anyone on this planet who is minimally civilized, intellectually driven, which is a different thing, intellectually centered, which is being civilized, which is a different thing than being educated, is what I want you to understand. They do not have to know written history. But they do know a form of standard history. It is one reason the more simplistic the people, the less sophisticated the people, the more you find that they have a great deal of interest in familiar matters, that they will have a great feeling of a great deal of interest in the history of their family. This should come as no secret, except people do not ordinarily attempt to analyze it in any particular way. But the less sophisticated the people, the more you find that they not only have stronger family ties, from all appearances, but they have a greater interest in their family. They have a greater interest in the history of their family and a history of their culture, a history of their nation. It is all forms of parochialism. It is all forms of patriotism in the widest sense of the word. But it is a history, in a sense, of history. It is a history of the standard life of man, which is a history of a lesser history. It is a history of man's subterranean days. All right, ordinary. This has already been pointed out, and I brought it up, but it's been pointed out by quite ordinary people, academic historians along the way, that the history of man ordinarily, and they're being somewhat funny in their questionable academic manner, but that history is just a history of the outrages of man, of the crimes, the felonies of man. That being the fact that they can look back over it, historians themselves, and they are readily targets for someone to say, well, you've rewritten the history of Europe from the beginning of the Dark Ages to the end of the Reformation, and it's being really reviewed well, and we know that you're a man of great academic credentials. And we go, well, yeah. And some reporter, some commentator, they've done it before, can say, why is it you historians, all you do? I've thumbed through the thing, it's 1,000 pages, and I bet you there's not 3 or 4 pages that doesn't have something to do, that does not have something to do with all the horrible acts that humanity has done. It's just an easy shot to take because it's true. But it's not the fault of historians, it's not the fault of any ordinary person. But consider, if I didn't already lose you, not the written history, but the history that everyone feels. Any ordinary person on this planet now, they feel a certain history. They do not by any means necessarily use the word or even think of the word. But anytime people are identifying with their family, watch, how about this? I'll bring you up to date, give you an example. Watch country videos, and you're seeing the non-written history of man. Every time you see, I love the farm, I love daddy and mama, and God help the working man, and I love my country, and don't pee on our flag, and don't talk about my religion, don't talk about my race. All of that is a recollection of the unwritten history, standard history of man. Standard history. And the more standard it is, the less application it has to man being human, to man being as human as he could be. It is, in fact, that recollection is a history of man's misdemeanors and high felonies. That is why it is pushed so strongly. Come on, move faster. That is why, with ordinary people, the feeling of patriotism, why people jump right up and fight a stranger and get tested just, hey, you don't like you're paying the right kind of allegiance, right kind of respect to our flag up there. Or, I go to that church over there. I saw you were walking by and you kind of looked over there and sneered. And they get very touchy, very pushy about it. And there's a reason. I just told you. Now, to an ordinary man, it is because it represents something quite admirable. It represents something that's in the higher rankings of man's civilized efforts. Contraire. It represents some of the lower, the baser, the subterranean, which is why you always find people. I mean, if you want to find the thief, if you want to find whatever it is you want, walk into a bar and holler, especially try to look small, like you can, or be limping, have a crutch and holler, I'm going to whip every goddamn thief in here. Or pick out anybody you want to. You know what's going to happen? They are going to get very touchy. That is, remember the point was you just wanted to identify who are the thieves in there. Just see who immediately sets down their beer and invites you to have your ass whipped by them truly. That's an old story. It's not just psychological, it is the internal dance of life itself. That you will identify the people. The history of man is the same thing that I'm telling you that people remember on the basis of it always being very personal, very limited, in a wide, expansive sense of the word parochial, is why the less sophisticated they are, and now we're still just talking about ordinary street level, we're not into any realms of individual success on anyone's part, but at the common level, the collective level of man, ideas of family, ideas of culture, ideas of religion, ideas of race, ideas of nationality, the more simplistic you are. I might as well go and refer it. It didn't make much sense, I see, to some of you. But it pointed out it was some psycho-grazing news. It was originally pastoral, but I thought, well, no, I'll make it grazing because it'll be easier to grasp. Should have left it pastoral. What I look like, hiding? Unless you're trying to secrete yourself from reality. Jesus. Give me a break. Franz Joseph, here we come, ready or not. Ed said the simpler be the cows and sheep. See, it's already sort of a loaded observation because I guess according to how dense you are to start with, to worry about, what do you mean the simpler be cows and sheep? How much simpler can you be? So, if you're going to have to think about it, we'll just move on. Now, if you got to think about it, as a matter of fact, cut the tape, we're closing up. I'm going back to drywall work with my peers. God, what if you wait too long, you went back to a decent group of people like house painters or drywall workers, and they'd gone so long that they're now all in recovery programs. Ooh. The psycho-grazing news went like this. The simpler be the cows and sheep, the more they depend on the herd. You see the connection, obviously. I don't have. The dumber, the simpler minded, the less you have any idea of what life is about, which there's really no useful grades within that if you're ordinary. If you're not more conscious, you're in that group. So, if you're ordinary, you're patriotic, you feel there's some importance to your family, your race, your nationality, your background, your culture, you're a cow. I mean, that's it. And that's why I'm not picking on it. Everybody else should be patriotic, ready to fight for their family. I'm all in favor for it. If they're going to check with me, like, should I go out and fight my religion? Well, hell yeah, if you feel like it. What if somebody insults my mama? Shall I whip them? You go to it. I'll hold your coat. What if somebody laughed at my country? Shall I kick their ass? Both feet. You should always be in favor of that. Not that life needs it, but if somebody asks you, you should be in favor. Hell yeah. But why is it that people feel so strongly? All ordinary people of varying degrees feel. And if you tried to narrow it down, if someone thought they were really urbane and sophisticated today, and they went, nah, I'm past all that nationalistic stuff. I'm a one-worlder. And they said, now plus you can't get me religion. I'm not religious, period. I don't care when, I'm just not. See, you keep on and on, you'll finally get them though, because they've got to take life personally. They will finally take it very personal, and they'll defend themselves or call them a liar. So you're just too stupid to understand that you should be nationalistic, or you should have pride in your nation's past, or pride in your family, whatever your family's background or religion was. You should be proud of that. You're an idiot. Then they're ready to fight. But the reason, back to the simpler be the cows and sheep, I still think perhaps the way things are going, we should stop and have a test and say, well, who finds that a reasonable sentence just to start with? The simpler be the cows and sheep, comma, who finds it thus far to be reasonable? And if you even have to stop and think, you have just flunked the test, or looked at another way, you have just passed the test. You are normal, you're sane, you're patriotic, you're chauvinistic, you're parochial. You got the understanding of sheep. Because the less you understand about what life's about, the more you have to take the collective aspects of life, the institutional aspects. The more you must take them seriously, as you should. That is not a history of man that is worthwhile. It is not even worthy of a man. And I'm talking about someone aspiring to understand more than my country right or wrong, my religion right or wrong. Or yeah, I may be an idiot, but hey, I come from a long line of idiots. I can trace them all the way back to the Isle of Idiocy. Had a great-great-grandfather who was on the city council there, by the way. In fact, there's some reports that it was my great-great-great-grandmother for whom the Isle itself was named. But we can't prove it. Sir, I'll take your word for it. It's good enough for me. No additional proof necessary. Your simple presence here says volumes. The history of man. Now back to, I know it seems like I drug us way off. The history of man is not important to what I'm discussing simply on the written basis. It is of no more importance, of no less importance than any other manifestation of the human intellect. But there is a history that is written into man that is non-literary. It is genetic. And here is where it gets interesting if you can see it. Because we're always faced with the fact that genes, that is what I've been calling the hormones versus the neurons. If we take the level of consciousness on down, at the genetic level, there is no voice. It just simply is not. Hormones do not talk. And so for me to say that there is a history of man, the standard history, and that it is genetic, not written, the written is just, I played around with that to try to get you to sort of disassemble it, to get you to look at the idea of history in a different way. That is just, it's no more than any other manifestation of human civilization, etc. It is simply a reflection of a standard history, but the standard history of man is genetic, of ordinary man. And it, what does it remember? Now remember, we know it does not talk. The hormones cannot directly write down anything. They have no desire to. It is simply beyond their field of responsibility. And so you would think, well, at least using my own terms, I could play that game about a viewer writes in and says, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing here? Because it's neurons that write the history of man. How can you go back and say that its hormones are the basis of the standard history of man? Okay, viewer, watch it. It's true. Hormones are the ones who write it. But the standard history of man does not come from man intellectually. It comes from the hormones. It comes from man genetically. What you have, if you remember the 3D little model I did of life itself, life in our universe, and then this representing the core, the black part, it does show up, right? And then wrapped around it, we have two different colored strands that I was using to represent the binary forces that apparently run everything. But they surround it, in a sense. That's why I had the model made in this manner. They surround it. And this, it's been called everything from God to fate to destiny to the subconscious to life. The rest of it is wrapped around it. The rest of it is an interpretation. If you take my model to represent what it is, you could take this away and you've still got this. This is not holding this together. This is, I can say, leached onto it, but it's not as though, well, it's not as though it's some sort of alien virus that just came from nowhere and attached itself, because we're still dealing within a closed universe, a closed system. But the point being, it is just taken by itself for a moment in isolation. It is superfluous to the core. It is, I could unravel this and still hold that out, and this could just fall. In the same sense that life does not depend upon you personally, obviously, to keep going. Civilization doesn't, but life it doesn't. Life does not, obviously, depend on humanity overall to keep going. Either that, or all the telescopes and all the man's observations are real puny, because we don't even see anybody else alive in the universe. We don't see anything else. The history, the standard history of man, is not intellectual, and it is not written. Even though it is, that's irrelevant. The standard history is genetic. But what do genes remember? Mm-hmm. Now, if I hadn't completely lost you, here's where it gets interesting and useful. Back up one second, make sure you understand. You would at first think, using my own descriptions in a certain way, that this is not so, that the history of man would be neurally, that is, intellectually. Because how else have we written down anything? How else do we remember things? Don't you yourself keep talking about this? Only the intellect that talks, so whatever the history is intellectual. Yes. But now don't miss it. And so you can say, well, that's the standard history, because we twist history. We remember what's to our advantage. The Romans only remember conquering the Greeks. The Greeks only remember, in a real sense, them conquering the Phoenicians. That every group, you only remember personally. You only remember the highlights of your life, unless you're a masochist, and then you remember the lowlights of your life. You remember all the times that sadists were nice to you. Well, then. Old Upper East Side joke. You would think at first that the history of man does come from here. Or what? Since I'm using terms, remember I started off my own description again, that there are two histories, twin histories going on, the standard history of man, the physical history, and the metaphysical history. And that the standard history is useless to learn anything. And it's more than useless, is what I'm trying to get at inch by inch, and it goes much further, it'll be foot by foot. The standard history of man is in man's genes. It can only be reflected and only be recorded through this. But it is in man's genes. That is why patriotism, that is why family loyalty, kinship, all forms, although they use the neural euphemisms, they are simply, again, forms to hide man's continuing mammalian territorial aggression. And we say, no, I'm defending the, and hold up a great cross or some symbol and go, I'm defending the faith of our forefathers. I'm defending the holy word of God. You're pissing on the ground to keep the other elk away, to drive off some other lines. That's all it is. But remember, that one great city, maybe I'll try it for a third time. Maybe I should, instead of just calling it a nascent city, maybe I should have called it the city. The city that sprang up from the footprints, the first footprints when Adam and Eve left the garden. The simple, erstwhile land of paradise, and were driven out into the cold reality of the secular world. And from the footsteps, I'm making up a whole new myth, and from their first footsteps, grew the first city. Long before Babel, long before Jerusalem, long before Mesopotamia, Babylonia, the first city Didn't even have a name. It was just the first city. And above its gate, it said, "We are born what we are." But for the city to grow, the sign had to go. Maybe 3 times charmed. Well, third time I've done it now in 3 weeks. And at least this time, some of you go, "Ah." The sign had to go. The genetic history of man is the only history that ordinary people have any aware of, have any knowledge of. And it comes out in what appears to be, or what is, physically speaking, very passionate forms. Is why people will apparently kill to protect their religion. Which, if you can see it, there is no good metaphysical term, it's horseshit. It's insanity. It's a useful, necessary euphemism. Oh, I'm sorry. I always get carried away sometimes and use more of that harsh street language. I should know better. They are necessary euphemisms. But look how passionate they are. But they are absolutely useless if you intend to increase what you understand about life. Therefore, the history of man is not just simply useless, and not simply distorted, and not simply twist of memory, which it is at the intellectual level, but it all is. It's irrelevant to the point. You don't have to select which history. You don't have to say, well, I want a better version of history. I want to wait for a new telling of history along a certain line. It's a waste of time. It's all on the same level. It's the standard history. It is the history of history. It is the history of man's lesser history. There is no exception to it. What else can it remember? What it remembers, how about this? I'll try this 3 times in 30 minutes. It's the history of history. All right, let's try this right quick. Fishing camp logic. For all of you painters who are off today. If you're listening and following this theoretically, we have already absolutely dismissed the field of history, academic, ordinary history, right? So, I've just pointed out to you that the standard recollection in man genetically is no more than the history of history. Didn't help. Perhaps if you tried some of that flounder aroma after shave, we could attract a better class of partial attention and understanding. Look how easy it is. Look how easy it is not only to discount history. Look how easy it is to badmouth, criticize from even intellectual positions the reporting of current events, not just history. How about the current events? People think it's a different matter. It's all the same. But the reporting of current events is always from the standard view. It is from the physical view of history rather than the metaphysical view. It is from a genetic view. If it just happened 2 hours ago, the reporting of it is from the genetic view. How often have I drug out and made up news items trying to point out how, it's no great revelation, but how almost all of history, and damn near, well, more so than recorded than so-called history, the reporting of current events, the news is all bad news. No matter how you try. You don't have to blame it on the networks or CNN. Listen to yourself or other people. Listen to yourself. All you got to do is fall into your normal network level of intelligence and awareness. And you're surrounded talking to somebody and you start off talking about something great. Like, boy, have you heard so-and-so's new CD? And you think, well, boy, that's good news. And another person will say, did you know last time I bought something by him on that label, the damn thing was defective? And you go, well, did you know you're right? But I'll tell you worse than that. I've been reading that although they claim that CDs are going to last indefinitely, there are cases now those things just rotting and falling apart. And the guy says, well, I know that, but most of that happened in England. Yeah, but I'll tell you worse than that. That new CD player I bought, the one I traded in, that Sony, I bought one of these damn things supposed to be an audiophile version from England, and it fell apart, and I can't ship it back. I found, Do you hear me? You start off apparently talking about things like, hey, isn't it a nice sunny day? Yeah, but my aunt lives down in Fort Worth, and their trailer park got absolutely drowned out. You go, well, that's strange. You're talking about drowned. Did you know my mother almost died of asphyxiation when she fell in the bathtub? And suddenly it's just... All right. People periodically, the only thing I'm saying is you know by now, that is no great, I'm not passing that off as some great mystical insight that only came about through years of meditation and fasting on my part. Periodically, just some regular peckerhead out in life will stand up and point this out. Life, no one pays any attention. They do not see any particular significance to it, or if they momentarily think, God, that's true. Then at the ordinary level, all your mind does is go into a kind of small stroke, like well, what am I going to do with that? I'm trying to get you to see now that there is always an actual electrochemical, physical basis that can be described by the dynamics of unnatural physics, which, by the way, is a registered trademark. Man can only conceive at the ordinary level, the ordinary mental level of history, which is now including news, current events, at the genetic level. And the genetic level is standard, and the standard recollection, even if it happened 30 minutes ago, is what? Is the history of man the history of mystics? In the full sense of the word. I don't mean the history of, well, Abraham did this, or Moses went there. No. They can say that about Napoleon. They can say that about Pharaoh. Is there such a thing as a metaphysical history available to man? No. There is none. Put it to you another way, so that those of you who might choke on metaphysical, I'll go ahead and choke. Screw you. That was a joke to make you snap out of it. Yeah. Except you people who take it seriously and sing at home going, now we're getting somewhere. You said metaphysical. You might as well turn off the set and undo your turban and go wash it or something. I was going to say these New Agers maybe undoing their turban and as they wash it maybe try to channel for the spirit of Mr. Clean or... You know. The mind of man, even if it happened 20 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, and it reports it. In other words, it's history now. What it reports is what? It is the physical history of man. It is not the metaphysical. It is a reporting of, make it a little blunter, getting here toward the end. You people should understand by now, there's nothing wrong with ordinary life. Ordinary life is what supports everyone. Ordinary life is what protects even would-be mystics so that they can pull off this kind of stuff, attempt to. But at the ordinary level, it is not man, shall we say, at his best. Even ordinary people admit that, collectively and individually. The more that they are assumed to be and take themselves to be intellectual, the more they admit, well, you're right. We certainly are not a finished piece of work. Man is forever struggling, trying to do better, trying to be more civilized. We're trying to get our children better educated. We're trying to bring all of the rest of the world up to our economic and social level. Yes, we are. We're not perfect. My God, sir. Okay. Did you hear that? In the avant-garde, in the front ranks of the intellectual cows and sheep on this planet, the parade itself of progress, they would be the first to, probably in a quiet, verbally pithy manner, verbalize the admission, the proclamation, the statement of fact that we are not perfect. Man is always struggling. We're always attempting to do better. And that sounds wonderful. Sounds like real good news, right? Yeah. Okay, except for this. People do not listen to what humans say. They do not listen to what life is making you say. Do you realize that if Kermit or Miss Piggy or Bert or Ernie actually listen, if they listen to what they were made to say, when they go, Bert and Ern or, my little, if they listened, do you know what would happen? Does anybody remember the story from last taping? that these one people had a story of mythology that said after life created all of the universe and all the normal creatures that, you know how machinery is, the creation machine kept running for a few minutes while life sort of wandered off or maybe unplugged it, and it took it a minute to run down, and it spewed out a few unexpected creatures who, being under those conditions, actually saw the machinery at work because they saw it change. They saw it go from being operational to running down. But you've got to have some comparison in a 3D universe to ever understand anything. And it said that those people were the ones who had some idea what life was about and why we were here and all that. And they also seemed to think that it would be beneficial for them to get around and tell everybody else to make it common knowledge. And as soon as life realized what they're up to, said, "Shut up!" Huh? All right, everyone who lost your place more than once, raise 3 hands. The history of man, back to where we were, you do understand this is not my attack on civilization. It's not my attack on ordinary people. Ordinary people themselves, to prove, to exemplify their own intelligence, their own sophistication, admit individually and collectively that we are not perfect. Right. But then you do not listen. People do not listen to what that actually says. Kermit does not listen to what the Henson family made them do. Because if he did, then Kermit would quit being Kermit. We don't go much further with that about what would happen, because that's never of any profit. But it would be that if he started doing it, the spirit of Jim Henson would turn to Kermit and say, "Shut up!" Or, "Don't do that. Go back, read the script." Of course, you understand God, that is Jim Henson, it's the one got his hand up your knickers, working your mouth. You know, it can tell you to shut up, and really, that is extremely magnanimous and kind of life. If it just tells you to shut up or don't do that, think. It could do worse. Oh, don't say something like, "Oh, they could strangle me or kill me." No. Worse. It could make you ordinary. It could slap you so hard you'd forget that you were once on a certain interesting adventure. They could slap you around and you'd wake up and you'd think, "My God, I'm 34 years old. Is it too late? Can I get into night law school? Could I actually go back to school and become an accountant? Learn how to program computers or something really interesting, or maybe drive a streetcar?" Don't ask me whatever happened to streetcars. The history of man, the standard history, is that which is remembered genetically. It is that which is remembered, the standard history of man by its own definition, is remembered by the standard part of man's mind. And the standard part of man's mind is the same as the standard genetics of man, which is what? That part that will then cause its own Kermit the Frog, that is the intellectual level of ordinary humanity, to go, "Well, no, we're not perfect. Certainly not, but we're striving. All of us right-thinking, decent people are always trying to do better." Yeah. You know, and Kermit cannot listen. Kermit cannot listen to Jim talking for Kermit. Man cannot listen to life talking for man. Because what you're saying is everything, not just up here, remember, we're not talking about written history now, we're talking about the history that is the basis of history. That which man's genes remember at the ordinary, at this level. What it remembers is man, I guess I'll have to get blunter, man at his worst. That's not the way to put it, but I fear that too many of you think that you're losing it. And a guy said, "Think they're losing it?" I already did a couple of those tonight. You didn't have to add that. What do you mean, become? Some people thought they were becoming lost. And there was a local DJ who was also a sperm donor on the side, said, "What do you mean, becoming lost?" Yeah. We heard that. If you begin to see that, then you understand why apparently all the history of man, or most of the history, is nothing but a recounting of all of his crimes and misdemeanors and all the bloodthirsty acts he's created, which have been pointed out, or, a little further, why almost all the news of current events is bad news. It's because it is a recounting is a history of man genetically. And man genetically, at that level, everything he does is less than human. Less than admirable. Less than it could be. Partially bovine. Partially mammalian cell. Partially beastly aggressive. Partially unconscious. I don't mean in the Freudian sense. Partially less than intellectually centered. What else can the history be? That when his own mind says, well, you're right, we're not perfect. That's enough right there, if you could hear it. Then, everything your genes remembers, everything that seems to be the history of you, traced back to Ireland or Turkey or China, what seems to be the history of you, tracing it back through your culture, your religion, what seems to be even the history of your family, what just ordinary people think, well, I'm not a stupid person. I sometimes try and be philosophical and think about things, and you don't normally analyze it in any particular way, but all of that's based upon a history. There was a man tonight said that he got so tired what was labeled about how assumed comprehension, that which people assume that they can understand and know, how it can unprofitably grow on you. I didn't say before you know it, but you're supposed to figure that out. That was the heading. The body of the item was one sentence, that one man changed his name to something that even he couldn't pronounce. Everything that you, without analyzation, everything that the ordinary mind, when I say you, the ordinary mind, even at its best, at the ordinary level, the ordinary mind, which is another way to, by the way, let me point out that it's not the problem, it's not a problem with software, that is, the history. That's never the problem, or the sole problem. It is also shared by the hardware, that thing which is remembering the history. In other words, it's not the history of man that's at fault. It's as much the thing remembering the history of man. And in the ordinary case, it's the what? The ordinary mind? Right! Good going. I was proud of me on your respect, on your behalf, or proud of you on my behalf for you, since I had to do it and you weren't there, and I went ahead and went. Sunday school will start later next Thursday than it did this morning because we're running out of those gold stars. When you stand and think that you are being reflective, that you think that I am trying to figure things out, that you, at the ordinary level, and you believe that you're trying to weigh not only your own personal history, the history of your people, of your culture, your religion, whatever philosophy under which you grew up, and you think, no, I'm trying to expand myself. I try to take into account other, whatever it is, you are tied to the standard history of man. And the standard history of man is subhuman. The genetic history of man, by its own definition, is subhuman. The reason that the history of humanity seems to be so bloodthirsty, so down there, liable to even belie the definition of civilization, why current events would almost seem to themselves deny that man has become civilized, that you can there, assuming you're sophisticated enough and think that you muse and wax reflectively, philosophically, you could be sitting around reading a magazine or a book, something about some of the bloodthirsty things that the church did during the Inquisition, or that some group of people did to another that seemed in all other respects civilized people 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and suddenly, out of the corner of your ear, you hear the radio say something about, and today in such and such area of the world, and they name some large urban metropolitan area on this planet that some group of terrorists claiming that they were fighting for some god, some political cause, blew up a train and killed 14 children and 39 pregnant women. And you suddenly stop and you think, my God, we hadn't made any progress. And you would want to blame it on, well, that terrorist group. Or you'd want to blame it. Then if you were a little bit better at the ordinary level, you think, nah, they certainly should find who's responsible, the individuals, and prosecute them, yes. But you know, there's something, I'm doing this from an ordinary mind now. And they go, yes, but there's something even more afoot that's troubling. This is troubling to me because it's not just those individuals. They are simply here we go, folks. They're simply a symptom of a larger problem. They're simply a manifestation of some larger area in which man is less than civilized. Yes, it is. And I'll tell you what the area is. It's called man. That's the area of man. The only thing that manifests itself to ordinary consciousness is that which is a little below ordinary consciousness. The history of man, the news of man, is always verging on being subterranean, is verging on being prehistoric itself. That's why I said history is a history of history. I wasn't just being funny. It is almost a history of the prehistory of man. Now, I know that sounds to be even a greater non sequitur, but it's not. The history of man is why it's so easy to point out that the history of man is the history of his crimes. Yes, it is. And you can say, well, why? Because man's at the ordinary level is a crime. Man at the ordinary, I don't mean as a cute judgment, man at the ordinary level is a genetic, is a hormonal creature. Man is not an intellectual creature. Man, I know it sounds absolute here at the last second. Man is not, back to the softer version. Man is not perfect. Man is not completed by his own admission. And yet he refuses to see, then that means that the history, what we are right now, including current events, is less than even my neurons say I should be. Yes, I hear that. Of course, we're putting a strain on Kermit and Bert and Ernie, I know, but, you know, keep those little, you know, terry cloth minds, try to keep them still for one more second. The history of man in each person, that which you feel is your history, that which you feel is the history of humanity, is less than the actual history of what humanity should be according to you, according to life. And therefore, to say, well, I'm in some way disturbed, I don't understand why the history of man is simply a history of warfare, a history of bloodshed. Yes. A history of, well, less than civilized behavior. Yes. Of course, I'm doing this conversation between, as I intended, between an ordinary person myself, the ordinary person, I was going, well, what are you hollering at? I'm saying all the right answers, you keep saying yes, and I go, yes. You know, well, and then they wonder if they were still putting up with it. Did I miss the point?
Yeah.
If you see that, you understand why there can be no metaphysical history of man. There is, and then you understand why the whole idea that if there is some secret, if there's some knowledge that is beyond, some understanding, some information that is beyond that which is normally available, then ordinary people go, well, they're hiding it. It's some kind of damn secret. They got it hidden. I just answered that. That's the child's version. Well, it's hidden. I keep thinking, I read about this, some kind of, there used to be secret schools, or that Buddha or Abraham or somebody knew something really secret. They actually were in commune directly with God or with life. And in some way now, if it's still around, I can't believe it just got forgotten. So, but where is it? It's hidden. I just answered it. You're never going to find it amongst the ordinary. Oh, you do know the ordinary lives here now. We're not talking about that. You're never going to find it here. There is nowhere to look. There's nothing else. There's no other place to search your memory. I tried to take care of libraries tonight. You weren't listening? And you knew I wasn't talking about library buildings. It's pilfered material. That's why they keep building libraries, according to this, if you remember the conversation. It's so that you can take plagiarized, pilfered material, that is books. In particular books? Yeah, books. Can you spell books? Taking books, which is the history of man, and you put them, since it is pilfered, you stole it, you plagiarized it, but hey, we can cover up for that. What you do is, we'll build a new library. We'll get an architect. I got a brother. I'll do it. Make it look like this, and so it looks like an original place to store the pilfered material. You follow? And that kind of people, it tends to distract. Is there anything like euphemisms? You're getting better, but how about this? Now forget libraries being attempted, the reason that they build library buildings. It's what appears to be, here it is, original to Athens, circa 527 BC. Or here it is, indigenous only, unique only to Oklahoma City, circa 1994. And the building looks like something new and original. But inside is what? Nothing but stolen material, pilfered. But it seems to kind of make up for it. Now you understand, we're not talking about the mind, libraries and books. It's your mind. And people keep saying, well, yeah, I'm an individual. And plus, I come from a long line of individuals. I come from a long line of this and this culture, this particular religion, etc. And we've learned a lot. I'm not going to give this up. We've held on to our great traditions. You got pilfered materials, and you think you're going to put it in some sort of original building, and nobody will notice. What do you mean nobody? You. And Jim made the spirit of Jim. Of course, now Jim's closer, Henson is closer to a deity. Now he's dead. And Jim made Kermit go, good night. We're getting